From Tumwater, Washington, going out to the 5 counties and beyond, No Shhh, it's the TRL Podcast. I'm Chris, your perfectly adequate podcast host, and in the state of Washington, legally a librarian. Here in the studio with me today is my fantastic, if ever reluctant, co-host, Annalisa. Hello, Annalisa.
Hi, Chris.
So, loyal listeners of the podcast will remember from the first episode that I made a joke, as I want to do, that podcasting is one of the many things that they don't teach you in library school. Well, there are many other things that you don't learn in library school, and that's what this episode is going to be about today. We've covered some heavier topics on the podcast so far, so we thought we'd lighten it up a little bit and have some fun stories. So, Annalisa, you only recently started working in the library. Before you had a library job, did you know that there was even such a thing as library school?
I knew that you had to have a master's degree to be a librarian, but I didn't know what that master's degree was in. So technically, no, I didn't know that there was such a thing as library school.
So we'll hear about that because the degree is in library science, quote unquote. We brought a couple of librarians on to talk about that today, so they'll share their stories about what they learned in library school and what they learned on the job that library school didn't teach them. There are a couple of my favorite people from the Olympia Timberland Library, Anthony and Claire.
Yes, you may recognize them from our social media because Claire and Anthony are a couple of my favorite collaborators for social media content. So they are a little famous in that regard.
And we're about to make them even more famous here on the podcast, and rightly so, because they are both very pleasant people.
They are delightful, and they might end up with our jobs by the end of this podcast.
Well, we're about to find out.
Let's get into it.
All right, we are here in the studio today with our guests Anthony and Claire. Both of these folks work at the Olympia Library, both the downtown branch and the new and amazing West Olympia Timberland Library located in Capitol Mall. If you haven't been there, definitely check that out. It's got a lot of really fun things you don't necessarily think about when you think about libraries. So, Anthony, you and I haven't worked together very long at all or in the same branch. But you are the assistant manager at the Olympia Branch, is that correct?
Yep, the assistant library manager for the Olympia and West Olympia branches.
And how long have you worked for Timberland?
2 years next month.
Oh, relatively recent.
Yeah,
Going
on
rapid
17
ascension
years.
through the ranks, too, because you started as an operations supervisor, correct?
Yes, which was the exact job that I said in library school that I never wanted to do.
We have a way of doing that.
Yeah, and I got there and I was like, oh, this makes sense. I get it. So here we are.
And Claire, your job title?
Librarian Youth Services.
Librarian, Youth Services.
Youth Services,
as it says
yeah.
in the email signature. Now, Claire and I have worked together at the Olympia Branch during the height of the pandemic, right?
Oh, yes.
Memorable times.
So memorable. Yeah.
And Claire, you were wearing a cardigan. You
I
wore
was.
one to the studio here. Anthony's got a cardigan, so they are librarians. You can't be a librarian without owning a cardigan.
Or official librarians.
Right.
Yeah. You get it at your graduation.
The commencement robe, essentially.
I wish.
And Claire, I like to think that you are kind of the prototypical librarian, right? Like I think if you met Claire and you didn't know anything else about her and you talked to her for 15 minutes or so, you would be able to guess that that was your profession.
Yeah. People come up to me in bookstores and ask me where things are because I look like I know what I'm doing.
Yes.
So I feel like
You probably do, right?
I do. So yeah.
You seem like the kind of person who would
Yeah.
hang out in a bookstore.
Yeah, bookstores and libraries, yeah.
How many
Yes.
books did you read last year?
You know, I only read 87.
Oh
Okay.
my
My
gosh.
goal was
Only 87.
my goal was
That's why I asked.
100. Anyway,
Your goal is 100 for this year too. Is that like
right now it's only 75 because I'm reading pretty slowly, but I've read 29 books so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my
That
gosh.
is the platonic ideal of librarianship right there for you, if you ask me. So
Beautiful.
this is who you want to ask if you need a book recommendation.
Yes.
I do regularly.
Yes.
A lot of my books
Same.
that I read. Yeah.
Same.
You
Get
don't
it to
ask
work,
me, you ask Claire.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
So we're talking about the things that they didn't teach us in library school today. Both of you went to library school, so good people to have on the program. But I did want to kind of get one thing out of the way, which is all librarians, well, anyone who's worked in a public library for more than about 6 months, we all have a poop story. So I just want to kind of cover that topic before
Starting
we...
out so strong.
Exactly. Before we get into this any further, we just need to acknowledge that we all have a poop story. And that is true, right? Yes?
It's true.
How many do you think you have?
So I think I'm lucky because I have never been in a supervisory role, and technically that is more of a supervisor thing, like to deal with that. Sorry.
The higher pay grades.
The higher pay grade, they get paid more. So I only have one.
Only one?
Only one.
Is it a very memorable one?
No.
Okay.
No. I don't like to think about it. There's just no. Do I have
Anthony?
to
I
talk
don't think
about
any of
it?
us like to think
I
about
don't
it.
have to.
Anthony, poop stories?
I
How
have
many?
2 that I can tell right off the bat.
Okay, well,
Like just at any time I'm ready with those.
All right, we're ready for one. Let's do it.
Oh my
Claire and I are
gosh.
having a similar reaction of, really, do we have to?
Oh, I didn't know we were going to say them. I will say the one that I think about the most is
While you're laying awake at night.
sometimes, but we have our bathrooms down this hallway, and there was poop that was discovered in the middle of the library, and we didn't know how it got there. So, but a child was the one that found it. We're like, okay, children happen, poop happens. But then we traced it back to the bathroom, and there's only 2 of the staff who saw the scene that was in there because it was wild. But there was no tracking of it between. So it's like, here's the source of the incident, and then in the middle library, there was no footprints or anything. And so my theory is that a child got picked up and carried over. But I do remember that the caregiver came up to me and was just like, "This is disgusting." And I was like, "Trust me, I know." Like, but you get to leave, and I'm here for 2.5 more hours. So that's the one I think about the most.
Beautiful.
And
That's
sometimes
actually an excellent segue, because I know we said we were only going to do one poop story just to get out of the way, but mine was very similar to that. In Centralia, I was moving a stool that was in the bathroom, I was kind of tidying up in the bathroom, and I picked up the little stool that's there for kids to be able to stand on to wash their hands, and there was a turd underneath the stool, and there was no evidence of how it got there. And the toilet was only 5 feet away, so we're not talking about walking through the entire library or anything, but there was no real kind of clear, like, did it start there? Did it begin its life somewhere else and then end up under the stool? But that was one that our security guard at the time referred to as a 2-glover. So that was what I had to take care of personally. But
the exact question I get is, "What's the story for the week?" Like hanging out with friends, and I'm just like, "Here we go."
Yeah. Sit down.
Wild times, but it happens, and it's fun. We keep it.
So the moral of the story is there, find the librarian at the party and ask him their poop story. We also other bodily fluids too, so barf, things like that. So
Blood.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
A strong intro into what they don't teach you in library schools.
because they do not. Yes.
Because that's just
Yeah.
not included in the curriculum.
I don't remember the word poop ever being said in
Yeah.
any of my classes.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
There are plenty of other exciting things that go on in the library that we're unprepared for. We asked staff around the district to give us their stories, and one common theme that comes up a lot is like animals in the library. So you do end up encountering a lot of animals. I know Claire and I were in Olympia during the pandemic. We had a situation where there was a bat in the meeting room.
Oh, so cute.
I know we didn't really handle that ourselves, though.
No, the Folgers can.
The Folgers
Literally, the animal control came in with a literal Folgers can and put it in there. It was amazing.
They had written on the side of it. Do you remember what was written on the side
Was
of
it
it?
bat can?
It was a bat can.
Bat can.
Yeah,
oh,
I know.
I was like,
They were very aware of the pun there.
This is real life. I love this.
Add that to the budget.
Yeah.
Emergency bat can.
Yeah, we didn't have a bat can of our own, but yeah, they
There's.
put him in the can, took him wherever you take a wayward bat.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of funny because in our most recent episode, we talked about safety in the library, and Holly from the manager at Lacey was talking about the protocol. If someone had her on her toes talking about what would you do if a bear came into the library? And so we have not had a bear, but there is quite a list that we've received of strange and unexpected animals coming into the library. So what do we have? That we have bat.
Yeah, we have bat. We had one person who caught a bunch of birds, actually, like by hand. Like, I thought this was funny because we asked for the stories, and I have also had to chase a bird down that got into the Olympia library. It was like we cornered it into a very small office, and I spent a good half an hour trying to get this bird into a box because they're fast. But this person works in Centralia, and mentioned that in their atrium area down there, birds would get in during the summer, and they had to try and capture these birds and get them outside, and said that they had caught 5 birds by hand, which is really impressive to me. So I think if you're doing that, you're in the wrong profession. Like, you need to be doing something where you can use that hand-eye coordination.
I want to see that at the next library conference.
I know.
Like bird catching.
Bird catching 101.
There's got to be some kind of like trick to doing that, because I mean, just with your hand, I've never
that's
caught.
crazy.
I know.
I can't catch a ball with my hand. Like,
I'm not coordinated either. But that we're in libraries not because we're coordinated people.
no, we're not in sports.
So there were the birds. What were some of the other ones? There's the infamous rooster from Centralia Chehalis, or actually Chehalis, I believe, was where the rooster was attacking the public and staff on their way into the library. Did you see the incident report for that one?
I did. It was glorious.
Yeah.
Just great. And I saw the picture.
Yeah.
You got a picture.
I went down there a few weeks later.
Yes.
And I did not get attacked by the rooster. I was a little bit bummed about that.
Yeah.
But I did get to see him. He was taking care of his wife
Very impressive.
and protecting her.
Good for him. Good for him.
I wanted to deliver a trespass letter to the rooster himself, and let him know that he was banned from the library property. I didn't get the chance to do that, but I did see him. Lost dogs, we've seen some of those.
Oh, so cute. We get dogs a lot in Olympia. We have someone who lives nearby who has many dogs, and they run around the parking lot sometimes, and sometimes they run in, and we have to just go.
Wandering into the library, unaccompanied.
Yeah.
They don't have a card, so they can't come in.
They
for
don't.
that.
Yeah, they don't. They don't have a library card.
Any memorable animal stories, Anthony?
I was trying to think. There was one person that came in once with a bird on their shoulder, and I had a lot of questions because it was not tethered to anything. It was just walking back and forth on the shoulders. But they just came in, asked a quick question, and left. And it wasn't even a library. It was like, do you have stamps or something? Which we do not. But
good to know.
They left. Yeah. I've wanted to ask so many questions from them, but I don't think I've seen them since.
We had
Wish them well.
one person submit a story about finding a lizard smashed in a book as a bookmark, like a dried up lizard. So there was that one.
I could talk about bugs. I mean, bugs.
Do we want to talk about bugs?
I'm just saying I could talk about bugs.
All right, go ahead.
I mean, donations of dusty old books and opening them, and then just dead spiders or live spiders, or other kind of bugs.
And we started with two traumatic ones. We have things we didn't learn in library school. We have number one, poop. I hate to say that into a microphone. And two, we have animal control, really. I mean, how you deal with wild animals.
Yeah, animal control.
So what's number three? What's number three, that things you didn't learn in library school?
My wife calls me the worst millennial ever because I'm very bad with technology, and I just have to
Push a lot of buttons.
I'm just flying by the seat of my pants. People ask me for help, and I'm like, let's figure it out together. But
That's
how
really
I learned.
what you got to do. You got to be, curious enough to go through the motions and feel like you're not going to break anything. I feel like that's a lot of, what folks are afraid of, is they're going to break something.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you have to try kind of hard to really truly break it.
Right. I'm like, you know what? We're gonna click this, and it's gonna be okay. And if it's not okay, then we'll figure it out. Yeah. So, the amount of printing from a USB.
It seems so easy.
The worst thing in the world. It's the worst thing in the world. I still don't know how to do it, but I do it every time. Every time
Well,
someone
they're
asks.
not making the printers super user friendly either.
No.
These are just like giant office printers that you have to kind of be the expert to translate that to the average member of the public. So like, you come in and you're the what was I called? The mono laser multifunction printing professional.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. That's on my name badge. It's not.
We need stickers.
Put that on your resume.
Yeah. So there.
I think for a lot of the tech stuff that I learned, it wasn't in library school, but it was working in a library prior to and during library school. So there was a lot of, I worked in a music library, so it was a lot of like, how do I print this score to get on the right size of paper and the right margins or something on there. And it's a lot of trial and error. And I think, I think that speaks to libraries in general, like trial and error.
Yeah.
And like, we may not have the answers, but we know how to find them.
Yes.
And that I learned in library school.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
As a library patron, I have to say the common theme with asking library staff to help you with tech issues is that they're all the most patient people you will ever encounter in your entire life. I think that's like across the board. Like, I've never encountered an impatient library staff member. So I think that that's part of it too. It's like, not only do you have to answer endless tech questions that you may not know how to answer, but like also always appear like flustered and or not flustered.
Yeah.
And
We are flustered, but just inside.
yeah.
You disguise that very well.
Yes, thank you.
Secret pockets in the cardigan.
Yeah,
Just
that's
to
where
like
we put,
store away
we
your
put our
anxiety.
fluster.
Yeah.
Yep.
There.
That's what cardigans are for.
Yeah, patience and empathy, I think, are like they go a long way when you're at a desk because you're working with people of all types of issues that they're coming in with, different struggles in life, and so you're trying to think, I'm just a simple librarian. Like, how can I just help them in this one moment and not make life a little harder? And that ranges from someone who's trying to look for how to print off of a USB to all the way to someone who's looking for housing or job opportunities from there. But patience.
Patience and empathy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially when it comes to like technological literacy and helping people with computers and technology. Because there really isn't any other place you can go if you don't have, someone in your friend circle or in your family who can help you do, set up your laptop or print something off or design a poster for your business or whatever. Where do you go?
Yeah.
And so folks come to the library, and so we see all sorts of things like that. And you just have to kind of try and meet them where they are, wherever their level of like comfort is when it comes to using the computer.
Yes. And that's why programs like Teen Tech Tutors at Olympia is very helpful because teens, digital natives can help
absolutely.
them. But we can also, obviously.
Actually, taking advantage of the teens, that's a very smart thing for the folks at Olympia to do.
Oh, yes.
Because
they know
even more
everything.
than we do.
Oh, my gosh. They know so much. Yeah, they should have library degrees. Yeah.
So, Teen Tech Tutors every third Friday?
First and third Friday.
First and third Friday at
Fridays.
Downtown Olympia Library.
I was 50% correct there.
Good job.
Yeah, that's a great long-running program, so check it out.
But I think what you just said was really important and beautiful, which is about the empathy and that you have to have for patrons. And so I'm curious, is that something that comes up in library school, or is that something that's all in the job training? Because it seems like a very universal trait to have as librarians and library staff. So I'm curious where you feel like that comes about.
Well, so I actually, to prepare for this podcast, I looked at my old library homework and slides from printouts and slides and stuff like that. So I just dug it out of the depths of the bookshelf. And there was actually a whole section in my public libraries. It was called Youth and Public Librarianship. About empathy, and we had a whole class about it, which was interesting because I didn't think you could really teach empathy, but it's just kind of talking about meeting people where they are, and you don't know people's situations, and just trying to remember that when you're helping people. But I also think that people who go into libraries are kind of naturally empathetic. Is that
attracts that sort of person to the profession?
Because we want to help people, right? That's why. That's a very broad way of saying, but we want to help people. So
I do think it can be taught
yes.
some elements, and I think that I agree that if you're going into a whole career that is in a profession that is currently under attack for existing and for services and underpaid at large, that you are going to have a little bit because you're wanting to help people, but there's always something to learn. You meet the person where their research is, but then when you hear about them as a human and their individuality comes through and their personal struggles, and it's oh, I need to know more about how to handle this and how to not take it home as well. Because I've helped people. Well, no, I've tried to help people and I'm not successful. I'm not able to for
you're not
one
the
reason or
right
another.
person to ask for that service, right?
And that's hard. And you have to go home. And I remember we had a training in Olympia that was about vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. And a big thing with that was, sorry to bring this down, the vibe in here, but a big part of that was having that thing after you do from work. And so for me, if I'm walking home, that's 10 minutes that I just get that out, or I can call a friend to be I need to talk about your cat, just to get this out. So I can go home and hang out with my cat in a way.
Yeah, I remember library school being very transactional like that. You learn about how to ask the question, how to ask the follow-up question to get at what the person really wants. But that's a lot less on the like empathy side of things. I certainly didn't take the empathy course myself.
It was literally like just a class. It's not like the whole, yeah. And I did go to
Empathy 101.
Yeah.
But it is nice that
my
it was a
school weird.
class.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was, yeah.
And I think that
Was.
segues us nicely into what you do learn, because we've talked about, a lot of things we haven't learned. What do you learn when you're like? Can you talk about your experiences? Because you've all very different experiences and going to school to be a
Yeah,
librarian.
I'm interested because you mentioned taking a youth services course. That was the empathy course, right?
Mm-hmm.
Youth services. And you didn't start in youth services, and
No.
now you are working in youth services.
Yes.
Did you go into your library school program with a thought that you would end up in public libraries or end up in youth services specifically?
I knew I wanted to be in public libraries, but I never thought I would be in youth libraries. Like never, like youth librarianship, ever, ever, ever. Oh my gosh! And now I love it. It's crazy, but yeah, I definitely didn't. It was like what you were saying. You never thought you would be in the position you were in, and then it happened. Yeah.
And you're great at it.
Oh, thank you.
Anthony, did you think you were going to end up in public libraries, period?
No, absolutely not. No, I originally, my degree emphasis is in archives and records management. And I wanted to go into archives and those research settings. And prior to starting in Olympia, I only worked in academic libraries. So community college, art schools, and university settings.
I also had no plans to go into public libraries. I actually had very little idea of what I was going to do with a library degree other than work in a library, unspecified. I kind of figured I would end up in an academic library, so that's kind of where I went into it with. But the thing about library school is you can go in, and if you have an idea of where you want to end up, you can take the right courses to get there. So if you know you want to end up as a youth services librarian and do story time and things like that, you can take the right classes to get there. But if you're just kind of going into it blank like I was, I took so many things that are not useful to me at all. I took a law librarianship course, which is sort of useful, but not really, because it gets into some of the resources that we don't have in the public library. And I took a course in something called strategic intelligence. So like CIA information gathering or like spying on your competitor business. And that's, as you can imagine, very interesting, but also not remotely useful in a public library environment.
No
so I just
spying.
kind of was picking and choosing the courses, and then also simultaneously working in a public library. And that's when I was like, oh, I like doing this. This is great. This is a nice little mix of like, lifelong learning and also customer service. And so maybe this is what I want to do. But by then I was pretty much graduating. So I was like, I guess I'm just going to live with what I learned, or rather didn't, and learn the rest on the job. How did you end up in a public library then?
Oh, well, I mean, I always knew that I wanted to be a public librarian because, I don't know, I grew up with public libraries. I love public libraries. I don't know. It was always my plan. And then when I finished library school, I just applied to all the public libraries I could. And TRL was the first one that hired me. And I've been here ever since.
And it was the first one you applied to, I'm sure, too.
Yeah, yes. No,
You're one for one.
I was applying to jobs like 6 months into my degree from overseas. So that was fun. But
tell us where you went to library school.
I went to the University of Sheffield in Sheffield, England.
Fancy.
Yes,
fancy.
very fancy. My library program was only a year. That was part of the reason I did it, is because I wanted to finish it faster, because I had this inane goal that I wanted to be done with all of my school by the time I was 30, which I did. I did do it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But also silly. I don't know why. Yeah. But yes. Yeah. So library school in England.
And the main differences of going to library school in England and...
You have to spell everything with a U.
Gotcha.
Colour. Like I was looking at my notes literally, and I adapted because I just did, and
They'll mark you down for that. You get like a 3.9 GPA.
Literally, I had to ask. When I was writing my dissertation. I was like, "Am I going to get in trouble if this is like Americanized?" And they were like, "Well, you're not in America."
You had to write a dissertation for this?
Yeah.
I didn't have to write a dissertation.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I had to write a
I
dissertation.
think maybe your program was more difficult than mine.
Well, I also in
1
England.
Did you have to write a dissertation?
No, I did not.
Gosh, what?
You should do a survey of this, because I feel like that's uncommon.
Okay, well, it's probably online somewhere. people want to find it.
I'm going to look
was
it
like
up
writing
after
it.
this. I'm going to make a note right now.
So exciting.
Claire's dissertation.
Oh no, he is writing it down.
What is it on?
It's on the organization of LGBTQIA plus materials in public libraries, because that's an interest of mine. And I got to go around to libraries in England and see where they put their queer books. And that was really fun, because I could talk forever about that, but some libraries have a queer section and some don't, and some have it in the 306s and some have it somewhere else. So it was a very interesting survey, and the results of my my dissertation was, it varies, and there could be you could do lots of different things. So I didn't actually come to a great conclusion, but I got like a 98 on my dissertation. So
And that's what's important, is the grade.
yeah.
We'll have to have you back and talk
yeah.
all about that. 'Cause
Oh,
that's, actually,
lordy.
when you mentioned that it was online, I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll look this up. Well, maybe not, because maybe it's kind of boring. But actually, this is not boring at all.
Now we're definitely reading it.
Yeah.
Now
Oh,
we definitely are.
boy.
You just sold us on this.
Oh boy, yeah, you get to read about libraries all over England.
I love that you got to go to the different libraries.
Oh, it was so fun.
As part of, it was like a full research project, not just
Yeah.
like a
Yeah,
sitting at home writing a paper.
we had like
That's too
4
long.
months. It was just a dissertation. Yeah, school in England is crazy. We like projects. Like I had a project in one of my classes, and it was one project, and it was your entire grade. Like there was no home. It was just your entire grade. Yeah, it was terrifying.
I was afraid I was going to miss one Canvas or Canva, it was Canvas.
Oh, yeah.
Like
it was-
one discussion board
Oh,
post.
yeah.
So
Oh,
if
no.
I thought I only had one project
No.
to do, that not the class for
Oh,
me.
it's
that would
worse.
be too much for me. as
Terrifying.
well.
Yeah.
So you thought you were getting into archives. You were planning to get into like archives and records management when you were going to library school then, Anthony. How did that track end up leading you to public libraries?
Well, to back up even further, so librarianship is my second career. Because prior to going to library school, I was a freelance musician. I studied trombone, musicology, and like low brass pedagogy. So I taught individual lessons. I went on like tours with some groups and like went to like traveled and competed in England and Scotland. So I was in England, but the North. British style brass banding, orchestras and that sort. And then I went to school. So I like 10 years of higher ed before I was like, I need a break. I can't do this anymore. Stopped going to the doctoral program I was in, was serving tables, and was having lunch with a mentor of mine who can I name? Do I like name drop? But
You can.
Are they
it's
famous?
It's famous to me.
Okay.
but a really cool project. So it's Stuart Hines. He's an archivist in Kansas City, Missouri, and he founded the Gay and Lesbian Archives of Mid-America, so GLAMA. And my first job was working in the conservatory library, and he was working a few floors up, and we just became friends. And we were going to lunch one day, and that's when it started that he was, every time we get together, he'd be like, when are you going to library school? When are you going to library school? And I finally one day was like, I need consistency. I'm like, this gig life is wearing me down. And I was like, hey, I'm going to talk to him. And I was like, it's either nursing or library school. And he was like, it's library school. And I was like, you're right. So I did that. And I wanted to work in archives from my experience working with him and with some other friends who did the such. So that's why I went to this specific program that had an emphasis on archives and records management, fully online program too. So I was able to continue working in the libraries I was at and did this. And then I wanted to move to the Northwest. And that's why I was like, I'm just going to find the first jobs out there. The first job after your degree is the hardest to get. So I got a job, didn't enjoy it, and moved to Olympia. That's how I got to public libraries. But I said that the one job that I never wanted was circulation supervision in a public library, and I was the operations supervisor.
It's
Literally what you
It was
did.
the exact position, but I looked at it and I was like, oh, I have the experience to do most of it, and so I applied for the job and got that, and here we are.
well, this is the best place in the country to live, so you definitely, cashed in your chips, and you did something that you didn't think that you would ever want to do, but still got you out here.
Yeah, and the only thing that I don't like is that I don't get that like special joy of going to my public library to pick up my holds. I just think, oh, I need to walk across out of my office and to the shelf and grab
It
them.
is a loss.
Yeah. So I don't get that like special trip to like call my mom who loves libraries.
But we do have so many libraries. You could just go on a special, like if I'm ever in Tumwater, I'm like, ooh, I'm going to go to the Tumwater Library.
I like going to the Hawks Prairie if I'm like needing to print something on my way to Seattle for D&D. So I'm like, oh, it's right off the highway. I'll just get there.
Perfect. Yeah.
Well, I think it's surprising to people sometimes, now that it's not surprising to us, but to people who aren't as enmeshed in the library world, I think that often they're surprised that you have to have a master's degree to be a librarian, but you don't have to be a librarian to work in a library.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about the distinction there? And
well, I'll say that you don't have to have a master's of library science to work in a library. That is something that's worth emphasizing to casual listeners of the podcast, because you're right, people are surprised that there is such a thing as library school to begin with, but then people tend to think, oh well, then you have to go to school to be a librarian, like in order to work in the library. But not, people kind of conflate that title of librarian with anybody who works in the library. So of course everyone there has a degree, but that's not really how it works. And actually in the public library world, we encourage folks who have customer service experience, like have a background working with people. It could be in healthcare, it could be in retail or food service or something else, to look at library job openings, because that's really what you need. Is you need that kind of ability to empathize with people, to ask questions, to to look for a solution, because that's what we're doing. We're connecting people with information. A lot of that, even if you don't have the experience working in a library or have never gone to library school, you can learn a lot of that stuff on the job. So you get the foundations in library school. They teach you things like you mentioned, how to do a reference interview, how to do that kind of research, how to, collection development was a big one. I don't know, that was probably in your core curriculum too, like how the collection is built, what's important in building a diverse collection that speaks to all members of your community. Those sorts of things, they'll give you those foundations. But the ins and outs, there's a lot of stuff they're not teaching you as well.
Yeah.
Anytime someone ever says like, oh, I'm thinking about going to library school, my first question to them is, what do you want to do with it? Like, what is your end goal for it? Because if you want to work on like what we call the front lines, like if you want to be like, a lot of people think it's a lot of shelving and it's a lot of like checking books in and out and answering questions. Great. You don't need a degree for that. Are you wanting to manage? Are you wanting to like be in charge of collection development? Yeah, then they're going to want that degree. And so then consider it. But I also have friends that started a library degree, didn't finish it, and still took away some really cool stuff from it and use in their other jobs, especially about like the organization of information, which is really most of what we do.
A lot of different careers. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I will tell folks, like, try and get a job in a library first, especially if you want to work in a public library, so you can see what it's all about. Especially you get like high school seniors or folks who are looking to college, and they're like trying to, they want to work in a library maybe, but they don't necessarily know what to do. And they'll ask you like what you recommend, and like just try and work in a library while you're in school and see what you actually think about it. Because it's not reading books all day, it's not typically a quiet environment, as we've covered on the podcast. So like you may have a perception of it that doesn't quite match with reality. So I do recommend folks like try it out first.
Yeah.
I wish I had done that. Sorry. I didn't work like at a library. I hadn't worked at a library before. I worked at a bookstore for 6 years. And then I was like, I'm going to go to library school. And then I didn't work at all. And then I got back and I was like, oh no, I need a job. So I definitely recommend, working in a library. That would have been helpful, I think. Yeah. Anyway, what were you saying?
I've been on a number of hiring teams for, and been like hiring manager. And one of the biggest things that I look for in there is that, especially for Olympia, because it's a very busy branch. So I'm looking for that customer service experience. I'm looking for how do you work in fast-paced environments. So if someone like works at a Burger King,
oh my gosh,
like you're probably learning a lot more there than someone who wrote that their objective is to work in the serenity of a library. And
you do see that in the cover letters and the applications, like, oh, it must be such a relaxing place to work. It's not.
And that's like when you look at it, you're like, all right, next. I'm like, you put it aside and you go back to read it, because we do read them all. But at the same time,
do you find that if people say that they love to read, that it's like a red flag?
No,
If that's why they're applying, because they love to read.
If that's why they're applying and they say that, then yes, I would say on that. But I've had like many cover letters that will like include like, oh, this is what I'm reading now. And I'm like, that's fun, but
That's a good
what
amount
did you do?
of that.
Yeah. And I don't need it to be like, here's a link to my Goodreads.
Right.
You know, join my Book Riot challenge group. But yeah, you don't like having that external like outside library experience can really impact and inform. And healthcare is another one. When I see people who have like worked in hospitals, I worked in a hospital, and that's where I learned a lot. I just learned a lot.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good that we attract book people. I mean, I think that's natural for a library. You're going to attract people who read a lot and enjoy reading, and we do, you know, what we call in the profession reader's advisory. So that's basically the fancy librarian word for listening to what you like and what you have read recently, and then suggesting something that you might like to read next. So it's good to have that kind of baseline, you know, skill that a lot of people who read a lot have. But if you're kind of like expecting that that's all that's going to be involved in working in a library, you don't have a clear picture of what the profession, you know, really is. So
I think retail is such a good place. Like if you've worked retail, you have to adapt to situations like pretty quickly, which is a very important thing in public libraries, at least. You have to work with all kinds of people. Like that. That's great. Yeah.
If you worked at a Walmart on Black Friday, I will consider hiring you
gosh.
for a library.
Oh my gosh. Yes, definitely.
Do you think the customer service aspect comes naturally to people who enter this profession? Or do you feel like sometimes it needs to be learned?
We both made the same
You know,
face.
like I said, as a library patron, I've encountered, you know, many different librarian staff where you have some that are real introverts, you have some that are real extroverts. So,
do you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm a double Pisces and a Leo rising, so I present as an extrovert, but I stay inside myself a lot.
Well, I am an introvert myself, but here I am hosting a podcast, so I don't know what that says about me, Claire.
I'm an introvert. People say that I'm an ambivert, which is like I can be both, but after work, my ideal situation, like if someone asks me to do something after work, after, you know, a day of working at the public library, they're like, yeah, let's go out. Let's go eat some food. I'm like, we can eat food in my house, in our soft pants.
Forget about it.
With my cat. Oh, absolutely not.
We can plan that dinner
Yeah.
in a few
For
days,
2
so I like
weeks.
have my
Yeah.
energy ready for it.
Yeah, I'm definitely an introvert. I think, it's interesting because I think the library world attracts a lot of introverts, and then it's kind of a shock to the system because they realize they have to present as you don't have to be an extrovert, but you have to
be able to talk to people.
You have to be able to talk to people. You have to adapt to situations. But there is time to go be introverted, you know. Sit at a computer.
There are certainly tracks you can go down that are a little bit more introvert friendly in the library world.
Yes.
Folks who are doing the processing and stuff in collection services, you know, doing the receiving materials and cataloging and things, maybe are not public facing, so aren't going to encounter that quite as much. So,
as I mentioned, I had that gig life beforehand, so I was always trying to like sell myself in that sense of like, oh yeah, I can do the thing. Hire me to play trombone. And so I was more extroverted, but then the pandemic started and I became much more introverted, like kind of like had that time and to reflect and enjoy myself more, like just being with my own company. And then I went back to, you know, I was working in libraries, but when you go into the public library and you kind of have to force that out sometimes. And that's thankfully, you know, you learn those self-care. So when you do go home, you can be like, okay, I don't need to talk to someone. Or I don't have to explain things to anyone else. I can just be like, yes or no, and go from there.
That was a fantastic segue, by the way, because the pandemic, that's probably number one on my list of things they don't teach you in library school.
Global pandemic.
That period of time, everything that was happening, nothing in library school or in life really prepared me for like, how do you provide library service to the public when they can't come in the building, when you have to quarantine materials, when you have to sanitize surfaces every single hour, everything was just shifting and changing for a good 2 years there. And Annalisa, you were a patron during that period of time. How do you think we did?
Awesome. I'm thinking about the experience of being a patron. I remember I had just gone to the library right before the pandemic happened. So I was thrilled because I had checked out an extremely long book that I probably was never going to read, and then got word from the library of just hold on to that. Maybe just forever. Like, we don't know yet.
We don't
Maybe
know.
that book might just be yours to keep from now on. And so I did read that book, and then it like got me into Libby, and I started reading. It became like, because we all had kind of our weird obsessive things that we did during the pandemic. And so I was like, I'm going to read an entire like huge series of books that each of them are like 500 to 700 pages. I mean, it was insane. And it just became, but then as the pandemic went on, it got a little less, fun, because I was like, oh, this was fun when I thought like I'm going to read all these books in this short period of time, and then it just kind of went on and on. But then I remember the transition from, well, now you can come pick up your hold, we're going to bring it to you outside, don't even get close to us. But that was so exciting for me as a patron, because I'm within walking distance of my library, so I would take my kids and we'd walk and pick up our hold from outside, standing very far away from everybody. And then it became, you can come in and pick up your hold. But I mean, it was this kind of slow progression, but any little thing I had, I was so grateful for. It was the time definitely being grateful for, ebooks.
A lot of people got turned on to ebooks during that period of time.
Yeah. That was a big thing that I think, from the patron standpoint, ebooks were real important during that time. And then, little by little, then we're back in the library, but with masks. And so I think just as a patron, I was very grateful for anything I had at that time, because we had so little. So it was like any little step I took, it was a huge deal. So very grateful to the difficult work that y'all did during that time.
It was chaos behind the scenes, wasn't it?
Insane. Completely insane. We had no idea what was going on every day. Like,
Do you
literally.
remember anything about it that really sticks in your mind as being like what you really were not prepared for?
That weird texting app thing that oh my gosh, where people would text us when they were outside, and it was this weird thing on our computer. Yeah, theoretically. And we would take out oh my gosh, we just had to do so much coordination, like on the spot. Like, there was just so much like figuring things out, and the take and makes, we had to like
That's
make
a new one, yeah.
that was a fun thing. I never thought that I would just be making crafts and putting all the components into a little bag, and then like I'm really good at Canva now.
Because there was so much,
yeah.
there were so many pickup options types of things. So
we
you weren't making the things in. So that's something that's kind of stayed since the pandemic, is having these take and makes where you can pick up something in a bag and go home and make that thing. But we forget that was such a big part of the pandemic, where these
we didn't
do it
have
yourself.
chat service before, and we have chat service now. We didn't have any sort of like grab bag where you could just pick up a random selection of material, when we do now. You weren't working for Timberland, Anthony, during that period of time.
No, I was working for a community college and a university, and a lot of my stuff I was able just to do at home, because I was like teaching instructional classes, which I guess classes are supposed to be instructional. I was teaching information courses to like different students and the general education. And then when I did go in, you had to like coordinate with all of your suite mates that were in the hallway of the offices to be like, who's in today? Like, and it will be in separate offices. I'll also point out that I was at a D&D themed academic library conference in Knoxville, Tennessee, like the big weekend in March when it all happened.
March 13th. That's
Yes.
the one.
Oh gosh.
And I remember like the whole, like people were just being pulled away, and I was like checking my email and being like, do I have to go back? And like institutions were saying like, just end.
It was a very fluid time.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember coming back when we were preparing for takeout service. So we had been closed indefinitely for about a month or so.
yeah.
And then we brought all the staff back, and we kind of put things back on the shelves, and we were trying to envision what this would look like. What would library curbside service look like? In Olympia, at least, where you and I were working at the time, we had a vision that folks would, they'd pull up in their cars, they would text this number, we would bring their holds out to a table. And so we tried to communicate that as best we could. We had the whole setup, and then day one, it was just a disaster.
Yeah. Disaster.
No one was reading signs.
Oh.
No one was texting. People were just kind of massing around the front of the library. No one knew where to go. And we had to rethink that probably 5 or 6 times in the first couple of weeks before we sorted out exactly how that was going to work. And then, of course, the regulations that, governor's regulations and the stuff we hear from LNI changes. And then you got to do library service differently. And so now you can let people in the building, but they can't browse the shelves. And now you can do a little bit of browsing. Oh, now you can offer computers, but wait, no, 2 weeks later, no, you can't.
Yeah.
And so there was this kind of like every couple of months you did a completely new kind of library service. And I like to think that I aged 10 years in that.
That's when I started getting
span.
my gray hair. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
For a lot of the constant changes that y'all were going, did you have like social media posts that went out about that?
Oh gosh.
Is it just like patrons had to show up and find out?
I feel like maybe we didn't do, I don't feel like we did enough necessarily to get the word out. But then again, we were putting stuff on social media. We were putting it on the website, but you think about capturing everybody who's coming to the library, and like you show up one day and the service looks like this, and then you might come next week if you're a casual library user and service looks totally different. Are you really tuned in to paying attention to what we had to change during that period of time? Probably not. So we had to really do our best to sympathize with people who had to learn library service as a member of the public. Brand new each time, like, oh, today you can do this, but tomorrow you can do this. Today we're keeping your return and waiting for 72 hours before we check it in. Next week we're waiting 48 hours or not at all or whatever. And we did our best, but obviously keeping up with it was hard for us. So it's nice, Lisa, to hear that we did a reasonably decent job, or at least the folks in Tumwater did, who were your home library.
Yeah.
So shout out Tumwater.
Yes.
Good job, Tumwater. Yeah.
Speaking
It was
of
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, speaking of library school, like I remember we had projects that we were told, like, do not, don't even acknowledge the pandemic for this project. Just think like the before times, or like, and we'd be like, I can't do that right now.
What does that even mean?
I just labeled 4 different boxes of like returns, and I don't know how to not think about that right now. But so it was like thought exercises on thought exercises, just for homework assignments too.
Yeah, we had some stories from staff who were submitted in advance of this episode that were about library service in the pandemic too, and things that you like weren't prepared for. And one of them was they had a canopy up in Lacey that was over their takeout window, and one of the staff had to go out there and like basically brush the rain off every, like half an hour or something. So they were like the sweeper of the canopy. And like these are like things that you would not really have to prepare for in any kind of job environment, but the pandemic sort of brought this upon us. So, stuff like takeout windows. You didn't think you were going to have to do that.
Yeah. We had like a whole little setup with the takeout window. I worked at Starbucks, so like I was a takeout, like I dealt with the window. So I was like, oh, this is fine. It was not the same.
Same Starbucks alumni here as well.
So many people who worked at libraries also worked at Starbucks, just saying.
It's like a pathway into librarianship.
It really is.
All right, speaking of the broom story, we have some other stories that staff submitted to us that they didn't expect when they started working in a library. And we're going to read a few here from their submissions. The first one is called Mushroom Sleuth. I fondly recall a reference interaction that involved a patron scattering some dirty mushrooms on the reference desk and asking if they were poisonous, which I feel like is safe as long as you're not taste testing them there at the reference desk, right?
That's such a Pacific Northwest thing. Like that's just such like it's. If you're wondering where we are, we're
also
obviously
that's where you
Northwest.
lead them to the right book and you say, "Here's the mushroom ID book. You decide for yourself."
Right. We don't want to be responsible.
I'm not responsible for telling you that this is not
those.
going to mess with your digestive tract or worse.
Yes.
It's exciting though. Yeah. All right.
As you grab a disinfecting wipe.
Yep. Disinfecting wipe. Oh
for
yeah.
Everything.
So this is a story called Eggplant in the Bathroom. At Centralia, we found an eggplant in one of the public restrooms. We posted a picture on Facebook and said, you can pick it up, no questions asked. But no one ever came to claim their eggplant.
I was there for that. I remember that. That's one of the most popular Facebook posts in Centralia Library history.
Beautiful. It's a very artistic photo. It was very
as
impressive.
Artistic as it can get. I didn't not responsible for that, even though I was working there at the time.
Yeah, I distinctly
so I can't
remember.
Claim it, but
there was lots of. It was like someone got down and took the picture.
It was right there in the middle of the floor too.
Beautiful.
Strangest thing you could ever find in a bathroom, I think.
Well, at least it wasn't. It wasn't gross. So
it wasn't gross. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, I've got one. This one was titled, Search Terms Are Like a Box of Chocolates. You Don't Know What You May Get. A little patron came up to the desk and told me that she was getting glasses next week and asked me if we had any books about eyeballs. I literally did a catalog search for eyeballs, which brought up the great title, Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? Big Questions from Tiny Mortals About Death. I might have said the title of the book out loud. The poor child got wide-eyed and will probably never look at the family cat the same again. I guess if I had gone to library school, I would have started my search with the keyword vision or eyes.
Probably not,
Nope.
though.
Eyeballs
No.
is a great start.
Yeah, eyeballs is nice in general, and that's exactly where I would have started. So I also would have scared that child.
Can I say that is a really good book?
I'm
Just
gonna place a hold on
everyone
it.
knows, and your cat will eat your eyeballs after you die.
my cat
if they are
absolutely would.
forced to. Oh, Taco absolutely would.
Yeah, she would.
Oh, yes, she would. Yeah.
Well, I have kind of a wholesome and sweet one to share. This one is called Baby's First Steps. I got to witness a baby's first steps in the children's area of the Shelton Library back in 2018. This little boy and his mom were regular library visitors, so I got to watch him grow from a tiny baby. One day I was saying hello to them in the children's area, and as Mom and I talked, the little boy decided he wanted to play with a toy a few feet away. Instead of crawling there, though, as he usually would, he stood while balancing with his hands on the seat Mom was sitting on and then took his first few steps toward where he wanted to go. Mom was shocked and overjoyed, and I teared up when she said she was so proud and happy that it happened at the library. Library school didn't prepare me for that. It's so cute.
That's lovely.
I know.
I do appreciate children more since working
me
in a public
too.
library.
Oh, absolutely. Also, since I'm a children's
Some of the
librarian.
best patrons to work with are children.
Kids are so cool. They'll just come up to you and be like, I love the library. And I'm like, thank you. We love that you love the library. They're great. Yeah.
So I got one that I'm going to recount. It's not written down, but it was told to me by one of our graphic designers. And graphic design, surprisingly, is another thing that I certainly didn't learn in library school. I suppose you could prepare for that if you thought you were going to do it. Sometimes we have to do program posters, things like that. I'm not a graphic designer, horrible at it. But we have amazing graphic designers here on staff at Timberland who will design program posters for us. And there was a program happening at the Tenino Timberland Library, and they were going to show some movies and provide refreshments in the evenings. And the program was called Friday Night Flicks. Sounds innocuous, right? So the program poster was being designed, and Friday Night Flicks, if you think of the word flicks, the L and the I were very close together on the poster. And for those of you who watch this on our YouTube channel, I printed off an example so you can take a look and see how close together the L and the I were. Now, from up close, that looks like Friday Night Flicks, but if you're standing 10, 20
Close one
feet
eye and
away,
just step
and
away.
you're just kind of glancing at it from a distance, that sends a completely different message about what exactly that program is all about. So we heard about that online and through social media, and so people had some interesting feedback about what exactly was happening at the library on Friday nights. So basically, the moral of the story is they don't teach you graphic design, and even those who did learn about graphic design still can make errors here. So watch your kerning when you're doing your program posters.
You know what also doesn't help is that on that flyer it says for adults only.
It does for adults only. Friday Night Flicks.
I studied copyright. We learned about what not to put on posters for like movies and like what you can and can't say, but they never talked about font. And I feel like there's a bigger issue.
All right, well, we got a few more audio files actually submitted from staff telling their stories about things they were unprepared for getting into libraries. So we're going to leave with that. But before we go, I want to thank Anthony and Claire for being our guests on this, probably the most fun podcast we've done yet.
Yay.
Thank you both.
Maybe this is a part one because there's a lot that we did not touch. It's such a broad subject of what you don't learn in library school. So
Or how you apply what you actually learned.
what we're saying is that you might be back.
Yeah, we'll bring you back for the
I was about
dissertation.
to say how to apply. That's also hard. All right.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Captain's Log, Lacey Library, Stardate 2008. A patron reported that while using the restroom stall, someone turned the lights off in the restroom, then rapidly started flicking the lights on and off while making meowing sounds. The patron said the meows sounded like they were coming from a child. Captain's Log, Lacey Library, Stardate 2016. A person from the Olympia Paranormal Society told the reference desk they had been contacted by someone about possible ghost activity in our library at night. They said someone from the city's custodial crew recounted several stories about strange phenomena witnessed while working at the library at night, noting as an observation.
I've worked for Timberland for almost 20 years, and there are many things I've done as a youth and family-focused staff member that might surprise people who don't work in a library. I interviewed teens for YouTube videos at fandom conventions that we used to hold every year in the library. I hosted an escape room run out of a retired courier van that would travel from library to library. And then there are the being in the library building as a community space experiences. I vividly recall putting out buckets when our roof started leaking, and if you've seen the cathedral height ceilings of the Lacey Branch, that is an impressive visual. Working in the library on March 13th, 2020, the day we thought we were going to stay open during the pandemic but not have any chairs, will always loom large in my mind. People had heard we might close, so the kids section was crowded with folks trying to stock up on books. I remember how hard it was trying to stay 6 feet away from the families I helped in the library stacks that day, way before most people knew that social distancing was a thing. One of the things that made me fall in love with working in libraries is how variable our work is. If I have a tough interaction with a member of the public, most of the time I just need to wait for the next interaction for my day to turn around.
Okay, so I've checked in a lot of books, and there's some things that you expect. There's often a lot of hold slips, bookmarks, things like that. But the personal weirdest thing I've ever found was not in a book. It was in a DVD case. So I opened it to check for the disc, and ew, there's a bug right in the middle. And I'm like, wow, that's super gross. And so I was about to go to the trash and dump it out when the bug started moving. It was not a dead bug. It was a live bug. And so then I had to run outside with that DVD case so I could toss that bug before it started flying because, of course, it had wings. I used to work at Suzzallo Library in Seattle, and I had been told that someone found a piece of cheese used as a bookmark in a book before. The worst thing that I heard someone doing to a book in a library was there was some sort of religious book that they didn't agree with, so they snuck off with the book. They dunked it in water, so it was completely soaked. And then they snuck it back on the shelf, so not only would it ruin that book, but it was ruining the books around it until it was found.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode. Don't forget to follow or subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners.
You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Timberland Library. If you have any questions or comments, you can email us at trlpodcast@trl.org.
Original music is by our very own librarian and talented musician, Stefan, at the Elm Branch.
Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep the conversation going. Thank you for being a part of the TRL community.